The first and last time Elias Thorne held his son, he was counting the money he'd been paid for him. The $20 bills were crisp and new, smelling of ink and possibility. They made a satisfying, sharp sound as he fanned them with his thumb, right there in the hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights bleaching the color from his wife's exhausted, sleeping face in the room behind him. The man who had taken the baby, a Mr. Black, with a voice like gravel and eyes that held no light, had already vanished with the bundle of blankets, the tiny mewling life that was, for a mere 24 hours, Elias Thorne's son. Elias didn't feel the weight of the child leave his arms. He only felt the exhilarating weight of the money in his palm. It was a solution, a transaction. The boy he'd refused to even name him, calling him the kid even to his wife. Lila was a problem they couldn't afford. Lila was weak. The birth had been complicated, and the medical bills were already stacking up like a death sentence. Another mouth to feed? It was an anchor that would drag them both under. So he sold him. He told Lila the baby had died. He showed her a death certificate he'd forged with a drunk doctor's shaky signature, bought for a bottle of cheap whiskey. He buried an empty tiny casket in the rain while she wept in their cramped apartment, her heart and her body broken. The $20 became $40 at a poker table, then $80, then nothing. But the habit, the belief that everything and everyone had a price, was cemented that day. It became the rotten core of his soul. For 22 years, Elias Thorne lived down to his lowest potential. He drifted from town to town, a ghost of a man haunting betting shops and bars. His charm, a tarnished tool he used to borrow money he never repaid. Lila had left him within a year, her spirit finally understanding what her heart had refused to believe. Her husband was a hollow man. He was a man who had sold his own future for a handful of nothing, and he spent the rest of his life trying and failing to find another score that would fill the void. His existence was a gray, monotonous grind until one rainy Tuesday, in a bus station smelling of damp concrete and despair, he was huddled over a lukewarm coffee, a racing form spread before him, circling long shots with a chewed pencil. The small television mounted behind the counter was tuned to a business news channel, the volume low but audible. And at just 22, he's not just the youngest recipient of this award. Many are calling him the visionary who will redefine sustainable urban architecture for the next century. The polished anchor was saying. Elias paid no mind. Money, he understood. Visionaries, he did not. A grainy, then clear photograph flashed on the screen. A young man with intense, dark eyes, a strong jaw, and a confident, almost challenging smile. His name was printed in bold letters below him. Julian Asher. Elias's pencil stopped. Something cold and sharp twisted in his gut. He looked at that face, and the world tilted. It was like looking into a distorted mirror, one that showed the man he could have been. There was an echo in the jawline, a ghost of Lila in the set of his eyes. A memory long buried under layers of neglect and self-loathing fought its way to the surface. The face of his own father, a man he'd hated but undeniably resembled. Coincidence, a trick of the light. He shook his head and went back to his form, but the anchor's next words froze the blood in his veins. What makes Asher's story so remarkable is his origins. Adopted from a closed record case through the prestigious Second Chance Foundation as an infant, he has spoken often about the drive that came from not knowing where he began. He built his future because he had no past to rely on. His latest project, the Viridian Canopy in Chicago, is not just a building. It's a statement. Second Chance Foundation. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. It was the name on the card Mr. Black had given him all those years ago. The organization that facilitated private adoptions for distressed parents. The organization that had given him $20. The coffee cup shook in his hand, sloshing brown liquid onto the form, blurring the names of the horses. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, caged bird. His eyes were glued to the screen, to the young, brilliant, rich man who was talking about light, space, and hope. Every word was a diamond, sharp and valuable. And Elias, the man who had spent a lifetime assessing the price of everything, began to do the math. The $20 he'd been paid was now a fortune walking and talking on television, a fortune that was, by blood, his. The greed that had defined him, that had lain dormant for years, unfulfilled, roared back to life. It wasn't a gentle reawakening. It was a volcanic eruption, obliterating any last shred of conscience. He didn't see a son. He saw a winning lottery ticket he'd absent-mindedly thrown away and had now miraculously been returned. He spent every last cent of his meager funds on a bus ticket to Chicago. He found a library and used their computers, his grimy fingers leaving smudges on the keyboard as he devoured every article, every interview, every photograph of Julian Asher. The boy was a celebrity in the architectural world, a philanthropist, a golden child. He lived in a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He was unmarried, dedicated to his work. He was, in every sense of the word, alone, perfect. Elias crafted a story, a pathetic and emotional tale. He was a grieving father who had been forced to give up his infant son during a time of incredible poverty and his wife's terminal illness. He spoke of a loveless adoption agency that had coerced him, of a lifetime of regret and searching. He practiced the tremor in his voice in the mirror of a public restroom. He rehearsed the single tear he would squeeze from his dry eyes. He wasn't seeking money. He lied to his reflection. He only sought reconciliation, a chance to know the magnificent man his boy had become. The hard part was getting to him. Julian Asher was protected by layers of assistance, security, and PR people. Elias loitered outside the sleek glass and steel office tower that bore Asher's name, watching the young man stride in and out, always surrounded by people, always moving with a purpose Elias could never comprehend. Finally, desperation forced his hand. One evening, as Julian emerged alone, heading for a late dinner, Elias stepped out of the shadows of a building. "Julian?" he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Julian Asher?" The young man stopped, his body tense, ready for a fan or a fundraiser. His eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes, scanned Elias, taking in the worn coat, the desperate hope on his lined face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice polite but guarded. I think I'm your father," Elias blurted out, the words sounding both absurd and momentous. Julian's expression didn't change. It was as if Elias had told him it might rain. He offered a small, sad smile. "I get that a lot, more than you'd think. People see a successful orphan and think they can claim a piece." He started to turn away. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong person." Panic seized Elias. This wasn't part of the script. "No, wait. Your mother's name was Lila. She had hair the color of wheat. The agency. It was the Second Chance Foundation. I was young and poor, and they told me it was the only way." Julian stopped. This was specific. This was information not readily available in press kits. He turned back slowly, his analytical gaze sweeping over Elias again, but this time with a dawning, unsettling curiosity. The shield of politeness dropped, replaced by a sharp, assessing intensity. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low. "Tell me more." And Elias did. He poured out his rehearsed lies, weaving a tapestry of hardship and regret, of a love that was forced aside. He spoke of Lila's fictional illness, of his own despair. He cried his practiced tears. He watched Julian's face, searching for a crack in the composure, for the vulnerable, fatherless boy he knew must be hiding inside the powerful man. Julian listened, utterly still. When Elias finished, breathless and weeping, Julian was silent for a long time, just looking at him. The city lights reflected in his unreadable eyes. "That's a very compelling story, Mr. Thorne. Elias Thorne." "Mr. Thorne," Julian repeated as if tasting the name. "You've given me a lot to process. This is a lot. I need time. Can we meet tomorrow for coffee? Somewhere quiet." Elias nearly collapsed with relief. He had him. The hook was set. Yes, of course. Anywhere. Any time." They arranged a meeting at a small, quiet cafe the next morning. Elias arrived early, his heart thumping with avaricious joy. He was so close. He ordered a water, not wanting to spend his last few dollars, and practiced his mournful expression. Julian arrived exactly on time. He was dressed more casually, but still exuded an aura of immense control and wealth. He sat down, ordered a black coffee for himself, and looked directly at Elias. "I thought about what you said all night," Julian began, his voice even measured. "It's a story of great tragedy. To be forced to give up a child, it's unimaginable. Elias nodded vigorously, squeezing out another tear. "It has haunted me every day of my life, son." Julian flinched, almost imperceptibly, at the word son. He took a sip of his coffee. "The Second Chance Foundation. They've been under investigation, you know, for unethical practices in the past. What you described, the coercion, it fits a pattern they're looking into." Elias's eyes widened. This was better than he could have hoped for. It was awful. Just awful. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I never wanted to let you go. You have to believe me. You were everything to me." Julian watched him, his gaze so intense it felt surgical. "I want to believe you, Elias. May I call you Elias?" "Of course. Of course," Elias said, beaming through his fake tears. "But I'm a man of evidence," Julian continued. "I deal in concrete, in steel, in things that are verifiable. A story, no matter how moving, is just a story. I need proof." Elias's smile faltered. "Proof? What kind of proof?" "The adoption was closed, but there are always records. A signature, a document, something with your name and my original birth name on it. Do you have anything like that? Anything at all?" Elias's mind raced. He had nothing. The only thing he'd ever had was the $20, long spent. He had the memory of Mr. Black's cold hand, the smell of the hospital, but no proof. His carefully constructed story began to feel flimsy, like tissue paper in the rain. I had nothing," he stammered, switching tactics to amplified despair. "They took everything. They took you and they left me with nothing. Not even a photograph. They wiped us away, son. They erased us." Julian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, unbearable. "They erased you," Julian repeated softly. He looked out the window at the people passing by, then back at Elias. There was a change in his eyes. The curiosity was gone, replaced by something colder, harder, something final. "Elias Thorne," he said, and his voice had lost all its previous softness. He was now the voice of a CEO, a man used to passing judgment. "You are a pathetic liar." Elias's jaw dropped. "What? No, how can you say that? You are nothing to me." Julian cut him off, his voice like a whip. "I knew the moment you said my mother's name was Lila." Elias stared, confused. "But it was." "My adoptive mother," Julian said, placing his spoon down with precise calm. "Her name is Lila Asher. She is a wonderful, vibrant woman who is very much alive and who raised me with a love you could never comprehend. She and my father, Robert, chose me. They fought for me. They are my parents." He leaned forward, and the anger he'd been containing now radiated from him in a terrifying, quiet wave. The Second Chance Foundation was indeed investigated. I know its history inside and out. I know about the man who ran it, a man who called himself Mr. Black. I know he targeted desperate, vulnerable people, and I know what he paid for healthy infants. It wasn't nothing. It was $20. Elias felt the color drain from his face. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. How could you know that?" he whispered. "Because I made it my life's work to find out," Julian said, his eyes glistening not with tears, but with a fierce, burning truth. "I tracked down Mr. Black years ago. He's an old, sick man, living in fear of prison. He gave a statement to the authorities. He gave them names. He kept meticulous records of his transactions." Julian reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table between them. It was a carbon copy receipt. At the top, it read, "Second Chance Foundation, Private Adoption Facilitation." There was a date, 22 years ago, a description, "Male infant, healthy." And at the bottom, a signature, a messy, drunken scrawl that Elias recognized as his own. And next to it, typed in a neat box, "Amount received, 20. Elias stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. It was the proof he'd been asked for, the proof of his crime. "He sold me a son," a voice said from behind Elias. He spun around in his chair. An elderly woman was standing there, her face lined with a lifetime of grief and strength. Her hair was white, but her eyes were the same as Julian's. It was Lila, his Lila. But not broken, not defeated. She was standing tall, her gaze fixed on him with a profound and terrible pity. "Lila?" Elias choked out. "I didn't die, Elias," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "My heart broke, but my body survived. It took me 10 years to find out the truth. 10 years of thinking my baby was dead, while you told anyone who would listen that you'd lost your son. I found Mr. Black. I paid him everything I had to tell me what he did with my boy. He gave me this." She pointed a finger at the receipt. "And he gave me a name. The name of the family who actually paid a fortune in legitimate fees to adopt the baby you sold for gambling money." Julian stood up and went to Lila's side, putting a protective arm around her. They stood together, mother and son, a united front against the broken man before them. "She found me 5 years ago," Julian said, looking at Lila with pure love. "She didn't ask for anything. She only wanted to know I was safe, that I was loved. She gave me the one thing I thought I'd never have. My origin story. The truth." He turned his gaze back to Elias, and it was filled with a contempt so pure it was scalding. "You didn't come here for a son. You came here for a bank account. You saw me on television, and you didn't see a person. You saw a return on a $20 investment. You are exactly who Mr. Black described. A weak, greedy man who saw his child as a debt to be settled." Elias looked from the damning receipt to the face of the wife he had betrayed, to the son he had sold. The carefully constructed lies he'd built his life upon crumbled into dust, leaving only the ugly, naked truth. There was no escape, no spin. He had been outplayed, exposed by the very child he'd sought to exploit. The greed that had animated him vanished, replaced by a void so vast and empty it sucked the air from his lungs. He had come for a fortune and found nothing. He had come for a son and found a judge. I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words were ash in his mouth. "No, you're not," Julian said, his voice final. "You're only sorry you were caught. You're sorry the price wasn't right." He picked up the receipt, folded it, and tucked it back into his pocket. He took his mother's hand. "The transaction is complete, Mr. Thorne," Julian said. "You were paid in full 22 years ago. You have no further claim here. Don't contact me or my mother again. If you do, I will not be as merciful as simply showing you the door. I will show this receipt to the world. Now get out of my city." With that, he turned, and with his mother, his real mother, walked out of the cafe, leaving Elias Thorne utterly alone. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty coffee cup, at the empty chair opposite him. The waiter came over. "Sir, can I get you anything else?" Elias looked up, his eyes empty. He had nothing. No money for the bill. No story left to tell. No son. No future. He had sold it all. Long ago. For a handful of nothing. He shook his head, stood up on trembling legs, and walked out into the Chicago sunlight. A man who had finally been forced to count the real cost of the price he had paid and found himself bankrupt.